Telepathy is the purported transmission of information from one person to another without using any of our known sensory channels or physical interaction. The term was coined in 1882 by the classical scholar Frederic W. Myers, a founder of the Society for Psychical Research, and has remained more popular than the earlier expression thought transference. There is no scientific evidence that telepathy is a real phenomenon. Many studies seeking to detect, understand, and utilize telepathy have been done, but no replicable results from well-controlled experiments exist. Telepathy is a common theme in modern fiction and science fiction, with many extraterrestrials, superheroes and supervillains having telepathic ability. Origins of the concept. The origin of the concept of telepathy in the Western civilization can be tracked to the late 19th century. As the physical sciences made significant advances, scientific concepts were applied to mental phenomena, with the hope that this would help understand paranormal phenomena. The modern concept of telepathy emerged in this context. The notion of telepathy is not dissimilar to two psychological concepts, delusions of thought insertion removal. This similarity might explain how some people have come up with the idea of telepathy. Thought insertion removal is a symptom of psychosis, particularly of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. Psychiatric patients who experience this symptom falsely believe that some of their thoughts are not their own and that others are putting thoughts into their minds. Some patients feel as if thoughts are being taken out of their minds or deleted. Along with other symptoms of psychosis, delusions of thought insertion may be reduced by antipsychotic medication. Psychiatrists and clinical psychologists believe, and empirical findings support the idea, that people with schizotypy and schizotypal personality disorder are particularly likely to believe in telepathy. Case studies. In the late 19th century, the Creary sisters were tested by the Society for Psychical Research and believed them to have genuine psychic ability. However, during a later experiment they were caught utilizing signal codes and they confessed to fraud. George Albert Smith and Douglas Blackburn were claimed to be genuine psychics by the Society for Psychical Research, but Blackburn confessed to fraud. Arthur Conan Doyle and W. T. Stead were duped into believing Julius and Agnes Zanzig had genuine psychic powers. Both Doyle and Stead wrote the Zanzigs performed telepathy. In 1924, Julius and Agnes Zanzig confessed that their mind-reading act was a trick and published the secret code and all the details of the trick method they had used under the title of Our Secrets. In a London newspaper, a famous experiment in telepathy was recorded by the American author Upton Sinclair in his book Mental Radio, which documents Sinclair's test of psychic abilities of Mary Craig Sinclair, his second wife. She attempted to duplicate 290 pictures which were drawn by her husband. Sinclair claimed Mary successfully duplicated 65 of them, with 155 partial successes, and 70 failures. However, these experiments were not conducted in a controlled scientific laboratory environment. Martin Gardner wrote the possibility of sensory leakage during the experiment had not been ruled out. In the first place, an intuitive wife, who knows her husband intimately, may be able to guess with a fair degree of accuracy what he is likely to draw, particularly if the picture is related to some freshly recalled event the two experienced in common. At first, simple pictures like chairs and tables would likely predominate, but as these are exhausted, the field of choice narrows and pictures are more likely to be suggested by recent experiences. It is also possible that Sinclair may have given conversational hints during some of the tests, hints which in his strong will to believe, he would promptly forget about. Also, one must not rule out the possibility that in many tests, made across the width of a room, Mrs. Sinclair may have seen the wiggling of the top of a pencil, or arm movements, which would convey to her unconscious a rough notion of the drawing. The Turner-Ownbay long-distance telepathy experiment was discovered to contain flaws. May Frances Turner positioned herself in the Duke Parapsychology Laboratory whilst Sarah Ownbay claimed to receive transmissions 250 miles away. For the experiment, Turner would think of a symbol and write it down whilst Ownbay would write her guesses. The scores were highly successful and both records were supposed to be sent to J.B. Rhine, however, Ownbay sent them to Turner. Critics pointed out this invalidated the results, as she could have simply written her own record to agree with the other. When the experiment was repeated and the records were sent to Ryan, the scores dropped to average. Another example is the experiment carried out by the author Harold Sherman with the explorer Hubert Wilkins, who carried out their own experiment in telepathy for 5.5 months starting in October 1937. This took place when Sherman was in New York and Wilkins was in the Arctic. The experiment consisted of Sherman and Wilkins at the end of each day to relax and visualize a mental image or thought impression of the events or thought they had experienced in the day, and then to record those images and thoughts on paper in a diary. The results at the end when comparing Sherman's diary to Wilkins was claimed to be more than 60%. The full results of the experiments were published in 1942 in a book by Sherman and Wilkins titled Thoughts Through Space. In the book both Sherman and Wilkins had written they believed they had demonstrated that it was possible to send and receive thought impressions from the mind of one person to another. The magician John Booth wrote the experiment was not an example of telepathy as a high percentage of misses had occurred. Booth wrote it was more likely that the hits were the result of coincidence, law of averages, subconscious expectancy, logical inference, or a plain lucky guess. In a series of experiments, Samuel Soule and his assistant K.M. Goldney examined 160 subjects over 128,000 trials and obtained no evidence for the existence of telepathy. Soule tested Basil Shackleton and Gloria Stewart between 1941 and 1943 in over 500 sittings and over 20,000 guesses. Shackleton scored 2890 compared to a chance expectation of 2308 and Gloria scored 9410 compared to a chance level of 7420. It was later discovered the results had been tampered with. Dr. Albert, who was present during many of the experiments, said she had witnessed Soule altering the records during the sessions. Betty Marwick discovered Soule had not used the method of random selection of numbers as he had claimed. Marwick showed that there had been manipulation of the score sheets. All the experiments reported by Soule had thereby been discredited. In 1979 the physicists John Taylor and Eduardo Balanowski wrote the only scientifically feasible explanation for telepathy could be electromagnetism involving M fields. In a series of experiments the M levels were many orders of magnitude lower than calculated and no paranormal effects were observed. Both Taylor and Balanowski wrote their results were a strong argument against the validity of telepathy. Research in anomalistic psychology has discovered that in some cases telepathy can be explained by a covariation bias. In an experiment 22 believers and 20 skeptics were asked to judge the covariation between transmitted symbols and the corresponding feedback given by a receiver. According to the results, the believers overestimated the number of successful transmissions whilst the skeptics made accurate hit judgments. The results from another telepathy experiment involving 48 undergraduate college students were explained by hindsight and confirmation biases. In parapsychology, within the field of parapsychology, telepathy is considered to be a form of extrasensory perception or anomalous cognition in which information is transferred through psi. It is often categorized similarly to precognition and clairvoyance. Experiments have been used to test for telepathic abilities. Among the most well-known are the use of Zener cards and the Ganzfeld experiment. Types: parapsychology describes several forms of telepathy. Latent telepathy, formerly known as deferred telepathy, is described as the transfer of information, through psi, with an observable time lag between transmission and reception. Retrocognitive, precognitive, and intuitive telepathy is described as being the transfer of information, through psi, about the past, future or present state of an individual's mind to another individual. Emotive telepathy, also known as remote influence or emotional transfer, is the process of transferring kinesthetic sensations through altered states. Superconscious telepathy involves tapping into the superconscious to access the collective wisdom of the human species for knowledge. Zener cards. Zener cards are marked with 5 distinctive symbols. When using them, one individual is designated the sender, and another the receiver. The sender selects a random card and visualizes the symbol on it, while the receiver attempts to determine that symbol using psi. Statistically, the receiver has a 20% chance of randomly guessing the correct symbol, so to demonstrate telepathy, They must repeatedly score a success rate that is significantly higher than 20%. If not conducted properly, this method can be vulnerable to sensory leakage and card counting. J.B. Rhine's experiments with Zener cards were discredited due to the discovery that sensory leakage or cheating could account for all his results, such as the subject being able to read the symbols from the back of the cards and being able to see and hear the experimenter to note subtle clues. Once Rhine took precautions in response to criticisms of his methods, he was unable to find any high-scoring subjects. Due to the methodological problems, parapsychologists no longer utilize card-guessing studies. Dream telepathy. Parapsychological studies into dream telepathy were carried out at the Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York, led by Stanley Kepner and Montague Ullman. They concluded the results from some of their experiments supported dream telepathy. However, the results have not been independently replicated. The psychologist James Alcock has written the dream telepathy experiments at Maimonides have failed to provide evidence for telepathy and lack of replication is rampant. The picture target experiments that were conducted by Kepner and Ullman were criticized by C.E.M. Hansel. According to Hansel, there were weaknesses in the design of the experiments in the way in which the agent became aware of their target picture. Only the agent should have known the target and no other person until the judging of targets had been completed. However, an experimenter was with the agent when the target envelope was opened. Hansel also wrote there had been poor controls in the experiment as the main experimenter could communicate with the subject. An attempt to replicate the experiments that used picture targets was carried out by Edward Belvedere and David Fowkes. The finding was that neither the subject nor the judges matched the targets with dreams above chance level. Results from other experiments by Belvedere and Fowkes were also negative. Ganzfeld experiment. When using the Ganzfeld experiment to test for telepathy, one individual is designated the receiver and is placed inside a controlled environment where they are deprived of sensory input, and another is designated the sender and is placed in a separate location. The receiver is then required to receive information from the sender. The nature of the information may vary between experiments. The Ganzfeld experiment studies that were examined by Ray Hyman and Charles O. Norton had methodological problems that were well documented. O. Norton reported only 36% of the studies used duplicate target sets of pictures to avoid handling cues. Hyman discovered flaws in all of the 42 Ganzfeld experiments, and to access each experiment, he devised a set of 12 categories of flaws. 6 of these concerned statistical defects. The other 6 covered procedural flaws such as inadequate documentation, randomization and security, as well as possibilities of sensory leakage. Over half of the studies failed to safeguard against sensory leakage, and all of the studies contained at least one of the 12 flaws. Because of the flaws, Norton agreed with Hyman the 42 Ganzfeld studies could not support the claim for the existence of psi. Possibilities of sensory leakage in the Ganzfeld experiments included the receivers hearing what was going on in the sender's room next door, as the rooms were not soundproof, and the sender's fingerprints to be visible on the target object for the receiver to see. Hyman also reviewed the Ganzfeld experiments and discovered a pattern in the data that implied a visual cue may have taken place. The most suspicious pattern was the fact that the hit rate for a given target increased with the frequency of occurrence of that target in the experiment. The hit rate for the targets that occurred only once was right at the chance expectation of 25%. For targets that appeared twice, the hit rate crept up to 28%. For those that occurred 3 times it was 38%, and for those targets that occurred 6 or more times, the hit rate was 52%. Each time a videotape is played, its quality can degrade. It is plausible then, that when a frequently used clip is the target for a given session, it may be physically distinguishable from the other 3 decoy clips that are presented to the subject for judging. Surprisingly, the parapsychological community has not taken this finding seriously. They still include the Ganzfeld series in their meta-analyses and treat it as convincing evidence for the reality of psi. Hyman wrote the Ganzfeld experiments were flawed because they did not preclude the possibility of sensory leakage. In 2010, Lance Storm, Patrizio Trisoldi, and Lorenzo Di Riccio analyzed 29 Ganzfeld studies from 1997 to 2008. Of the 1,498 trials, 483 produced hits, corresponding to a hit rate of 32.2%. This hit rate is statistically significant with p.001. Participants selected for personality traits and personal characteristics thought to be psych-conducive were found to perform significantly better than unselected participants in the Ganzfeld condition. Hyman published a rebuttal to Storm et al. According to Hyman, reliance on meta-analysis is the sole basis for justifying the claim that an anomaly exists and that the evidence for it is consistent and replicable is fallacious. It distorts what scientists mean by confirmatory evidence. Hyman wrote the Ganzfeld studies have not been independently replicated and have failed to produce evidence for telepathy. Storm et al. Published a response to Hyman claiming the Ganzfeld experimental design has proved to be consistent and reliable, but parapsychology is a struggling discipline that has not received much attention, so further research on the subject is necessary. Rauder et al. 2013 wrote that critical evaluation of Storm et al.'s meta-analysis reveals no evidence for telepathy, no plausible mechanism, and omitted replication failures. Scientific reception: a variety of tests have been performed to demonstrate telepathy, but there is no scientific evidence that the power exists. A panel commissioned by the United States National Research Council to study paranormal claims concluded that despite a 130-year record of scientific research on such matters, our committee could find no scientific justification for the existence of phenomena such as extrasensory perception, mental telepathy, or a mind over matter unregistered trademark exercises. Evaluation of a large body of the best available evidence simply does not support the contention that these phenomena exist. The scientific community considers parapsychology a pseudoscience. There is no known mechanism for telepathy. Mario Bunge has written telepathy would contradict laws of science, and the claim that signals can be transmitted across space without fading with distance is inconsistent with physics. The physicist John Taylor has written the experiments that have been claimed by parapsychologists to support evidence for the existence of telepathy are based on the use of shaky statistical analysis, poor design, and attempts to duplicate such experiments by the scientific community have failed. Taylor also wrote the arguments used by parapsychologists for the feasibility of such phenomena are based on distortions of theoretical physics as well as complete ignorance of relevant areas of physics. Outside of parapsychology, telepathy is generally explained as the result of fraud, self-delusion and/or self-deception, and not as a paranormal power. Psychological research has also revealed other explanations such as confirmation bias, expectancy bias, sensory leakage, subjective validation, and wishful thinking. Virtually all of the instances of more popular psychic phenomena, such as mediumship, can be attributed to non-paranormal techniques such as cold reading. Magicians such as Ian Rowland and Derren Brown have demonstrated techniques and results similar to those of popular psychics, without paranormal means. They have identified, described, and developed psychological techniques of cold reading and hot reading. In popular culture, telepathy is commonly used in fiction, with a number of superheroes and supervillains, as well as figures in many science fiction novels, etc., using telepathy. The mechanics of telepathy in fiction vary widely. Some fictional telepaths are limited to receiving only thoughts that are deliberately sent by other telepaths, or even to receiving thoughts from a specific other person. For example, in Robert A. Heinlein's 1956 novel Time for the Stars, certain pairs of twins are able to send telepathic messages to each other. In a Van Vogt science fiction novel Slan, the mutant hero Jommy Cross can read the minds of ordinary humans. Some telepaths can read the thoughts only of those they touch, such as Vulcans in the Star Trek media franchise. Star Trek science consultant and writer Andrew Copyright Bormanis has revealed that telepathy within the Star Trek universe works via the sonic field. According to Bormanis, a sonic field is the medium through which unspoken thoughts and feelings are communicated through space. Some humanoids can tap into this field through a kind of sense organ located in the brain. In the same manner that human eyes can sense portions of the electromagnetic field, telepaths can sense portions of the sonic field. Additionally, Both the Jedi Knights and Lords of the Sith in the George Lucas Star Wars film franchise exhibit telepathic and telekinetic abilities utilizing a sonic energy field called the Force. Multiple books by Anne McCaffrey feature the use of mental communication. Most notably would be her Talent series and the Dragon Riders of Pern series. In her Pern novels, all dragons and their riders share a telepathic bond in which they mutually transmit both language and images. On Pern, any dragon is able to use telepathy to communicate with any human, while only a very few individuals are capable of initiating telepathic contact with a dragon that is not bonded to them. In the book Eragon can communicate mentally with his dragon Saphira, and it is possible to block people from one's mind with a barrier. In the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, telepathy is a magical skill known as legilimency. In the John Wyndham novel The Chrysalids, the main character and narrator David Storm is one of a group of 9 telepaths. In Anthony Horowitz's Power of 5 series, twins Jamie and Scott Tyler were born with telepathic powers that enable them to read people's minds and, ultimately, control them. They always know each other's thoughts, which earns them money doing tricks at a circus in Reno, Nevada, USA. Some writers view telepathy as the evolutionary destiny of humanity. In Tony Vigorato's novel, Just a Couple of Days, telepathy emerges across the entire human species as a result of the Pied Piper virus, which inadvertently eliminates humanity's symbolic capacity. In this instance, telepathy is seen as a latent ability that emerges only when the distractions of language are bypassed. Some fictional telepaths possess mind control abilities, which can include pushing thoughts, feelings, or hallucinatory visions into the mind of another person, causing pain, paralysis, or unconsciousness, altering or erasing memories, or completely taking over another person's mind and body. Examples of this type of telepath include Professor Xavier, Psylocke, Jean Grey, Emma Frost, and numerous other characters in the Marvel Universe, along with Matt Parkerman from the television series Heroes. The radio crime fighter The Shadow had the power to cloud men's minds, which he used to mask his presence from others. The film Scanners concerns people born with telepathy and those with telekinetic abilities. The Urdu novel Devta is based on the character of Fahad Ali Taimur, a telepath involved in the fight of good and evil. Television show The Listener centers around a telepathic paramedic. Telepaths play a huge role in the science fiction show Babylon 5, with several of the main characters being telepaths, as well as a drug known as dust that can artificially induce telepathic abilities in someone. See also a composite list of fictional characters with telepathy. See also, extended mind, the concept that things frequently used by the mind become part of it. Ishindenshin, traditional Japanese concept of unspoken mutual understanding, sometimes translated as telepathy. Lady Wonder, a horse that appeared to answer questions. Quantum pseudo-telepathy, a phenomenon in quantum game theory. Notes. External links: The Intuitive Magician, Bruce Hood, Telepathy, Skeptics Dictionary, Sol-Goldney Experiment, a critical evaluation of the Sol-Goldney experiment, which claimed to prove the existence of telepathy, dream and telepathy, article in Science and Psychoanalysis.